IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of hands-on cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your Cyber Hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. Come on, we need our listeners. We need some audience growth. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Fishshell Ruiz about wrangling dependencies, defining useful security requirements, and finding devs to help open source maintainers. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and we're continuing on with our The Day is the 13th, and it's episode 313. And I'm out of good references for things that aren't lucky, but so we'll see what just happens to come up, John. You'll have to help me out here.
We will find a way.
We will find a way. One way that PyPI platform has been trying to find a way is tamp down on malware. And there's a certain category of news articles out there that I honestly kind of purposely avoid. It's sort of like, there are this many malware packages on NPM. There are this many on PyPI. Here's over in Ruby. These are just kind of numbers that are kind of reinforcing malware exists, which, okay, I think we know that. But this article is talking about a really interesting approach from the platform to not only design, but also implement Project Quarantine. So the idea is that, to quote, malware on PyPI is a persistent problem. Okay, good. But what are we going to do about this? And this is a little bit of a callback to security requirements, let's say, our conversation with Fishshell. And that they pointed out originally one of the problems is that the repo, the package manager, they get malware reports, and it would be typically just this entire project is bad. This project is malware, but sometimes it's a legit good project that we want to continue to have, and the malware has just been snuck into a single file or in a single release, and so they can't have a huge ban hammer that just says, we're going to, take down this project so no one can use it. We need to figure out, how do we yank this particular release or this particular file so that we can protect users from themselves. And so that's what really, and what I appreciated about this article is thinking through those edge cases, demonstrating that the problem isn't so simple as an AppSec team coming and saying, hey, if there's malware, just take it down. You have to accommodate, well, what happens if we take it down? What happens if we have some bad actors who are brigading and falsely reporting that a project is malware and it gets quarantined, and that creates a denial of service type of scenario. So this is where, as you can tell by me not giving John a chance to get a word in edgewise, why I get excited about this type of design and implementation thinking. So I love this article, love that it walks through, and I've maybe one or two more things to say, but I'm going to put myself on pause and let's get John to get a word in edgewise.
God, finally. Jesus.
Finally.
So I want to take a step back actually first, because when you started talking about that is we were talking about this off air. And I think you guys, our listeners, are going to hear us. We're going to try and move our focus around a little bit this year, right? There's a lot of things we talked about in 2024, which, that same thing again. So we're going to try and I've already distanced myself on one or two vendors, shall we say. But so we're going to keep trying to change that. And the goal here is to provide education and, you had a different word, Mike, I don't know if you remember it. Information. But we're going to try and sort of, we want to focus on not just say like, oh, here's 10 vulnerabilities we found this week, right? That's okay. That's cool. We can talk through that, but we want to switch it up and do some different things. So, please give us feedback. We're not perfect. After this whole rant, I'm going to be talking about Rust again in a few minutes. Apologies. But, let's try and find the interesting and cool and the things in AppSec which allow us to have our day-to-day job be, find a new trick or like learn something or figure out a different way to talk to people. So hopefully that comes through. But yeah, this is really cool, I think. I I've been waiting for this for one of the other languages for over a year now, but I think this is a great start for Python. And it's not like the only thing they had. They had something before called Yank, which is sort of neat. So if it's a project which had no code released yet, or it was a fairly clean, empty project, they had a system which would stop you from installing it, which sounds sort of, minimal, but still it was that first step previously in this direction. This will be one of those ones that's going on my 3 months later type thing. I want to come back and see as they implement this and run with it. What do they see? How do people respond to it? Is there? I mean, they've got a usage graph in here. It looks like they've been doing it since what, August?
Since August.
But over a little more time now, this sort of they're talking about it like this. How do people react? Are we seeing? Will there be a decrease in some of those type of issues we were seeing in the last few years? So that's where my head is on it. You had a few more points. I'm super excited to see they're doing it. I want to see the other languages do something like this. And maybe they can share across languages. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too far in the future, but
I think I like that direction because, as you mentioned, we have sort of the 3 months later already because this has been implemented since August, and they highlight that they've marked about 140 project as quarantined, meaning they go in and they don't come out, because meaning that no users can install now from PyPI because it's been quarantined. There was only a single project that actually exited quarantine, and it actually went in there because it contained obfuscated code that was against the acceptable use policy. They reached out to the maintainer who said, "Oh, let me de-obfuscate that code. This is a legitimate project." And they worked through with that maintainer, corrected the problem. And it looks to me like this is security doing the right thing. I think one of the other points I want to make about this in the spirit of secure design thinking, is that when you revoke or yank or quarantine a project, that project name now is officially permanently gone. It's removed forever. And because namespaces carry identity, they carry trust. And this is something that we've seen with, call it usernames in social media, even your email address. If your email address, you stop using it and that can be reused, but you didn't update it on your password recovery mechanisms, a bad actor can get your password recovery emails. And we've seen a similar thing in even just subdomain takeovers with CNAMEs and DNS. So this is the other reason, just kind of in that sense of, here's a secure design principle about, is your name or your namespace, what trust or what identity is based on that? And do you need to have it unique? What happens if it's removed, etc.? So that's my thought for the day. And yes, as John said, listeners, please give us feedback on where we're going with this. Where we're also... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Nope. Well, keep going, I think. Backing up about 10 seconds there on the... once a project's been removed, that name is removed from the capabilities, or not capabilities, pick a word. That's bit me. Mm-hmm. So I used to have JLK on Proton Mail. I wasn't using it. My credit card expired or something and like the account got shut down. I can't get it back. That's their policy, it's good. I see the value for it, but it feels like there needs to be some sort of wiggle room in there. I don't know what it is, or maybe not. Wiggle room is not the accurate phrase for it. Sorry. It feels like there should be some probably complex, but way to like, how do you get that, package name back if maybe you made a mistake or something happened or, so yeah, one-way doors I'm not a really huge fan of, but I see why they're there. So
right, and as you're pointing out, we can throw on our threat modeling hats, and we can think about what are the bad actor approaches to just squatting on project names. And so now they've now taken all those one-way doors. So legit project, I say legit, or desirable projects that want to create and maintain code on an ongoing basis, delivering packages that other people are using. That's my definition of legit here. They have to use some other fancy different type of name. And we've even, as a quick callback, we've even seen a namespace collision where a user took down their package, causing a DOS. And that was not left pad, but it was related to kick. And now I'm going to have to get some corrections from our listeners about which one that was. I'm sure everyone loves to do that. But John, while our listeners are sending us feedback, hopefully we're just getting feedback from listeners and not phishing crews. Here's an article, A Day in the Life of a Prolific Voice Phishing Crew from Krebs on Security. And in fact, this may only be the first or second time I've pulled in an article from Krebs, mostly just because he tends to cover things that don't fall squarely or as obviously, or I'll say purely in scare quotes, into AppSec, but still a great news source. I'm highlighting this for two reasons. The first reason is a little bit of the mechanics behind this. This is social engineering, taking advantage of people either being greedy, either being confused, or something like that. Applying a false sense of pressure on, or fear that, oh, your account is being compromised, or hey, JLK, we're trying to get your Proton Mail account back. We just need you to click on this link, and we need you to do a couple of the other of these steps. And by the way, send us some Bitcoin, and we'll get it back for you. My point here is that part of this technique was not just click on this link, haha, we got you. They were kind of misusing and being clever about Apple's security confirmation alerts, where they were pretending to be from Apple, but they could also then trigger some alerts from a password reset, or from other devices, and looking and using that to try and reinforce that they are, oh, look what happened. I'm actually am from Apple, even though there was no causality here. It was just a coincidence of correlation in phishing. That's me stumbling over some of the mechanics of this. Read the article. The other part, though, John, I wanted to highlight this was, let's talk for briefly about security awareness and whether we want security awareness and AppSec to teach users about jargon, about phishing. And I'm not even going to name all the stupid variants of phishing other than SMS-based phishing or QR-based phishing, QR code. In other words, do we really want to have people remember all the ways that there are delivery mechanisms that a scam could come? Or do we want them to have maybe better password management, or using a password manager, or using passkeys? So this is where I'm coming from. Hopefully, I'm not sure. Are you with me on this, or do we need to, what's our security awareness going to look like when October comes around?
I always remember back to the I think it was the first or second time I studied for the CISSP test back in the many days ago. There was a phrase of whatever book I was using near the front that talked about, like, there's a reason we have a vocabulary vocabulary in InfoSec in a lot of different spaces, right? Like, so we're able to talk a common language and understand when we talk about SQL injection or cross-site scripting or all these type of things, right? But there's a difference then between, like, what should be part of that. I don't know if I want to say core vocabulary, but I'll say core vocabulary versus either, and I like to pick on marketing, but it could be marketing, or it could be like, hey, the guys that they're doing nothing all day but like responding, the incident responders that are doing nothing but like phishing attacks and those type of things, they most definitely care about the different sort of types of smishing, phishing, whatever they're, but it becomes that communication thing when you go back to general public, foreshadowing into another story. But as you go back to general public, right, they don't care or know, or you're just confusing them, right? My wife was talking to my father-in-law over the weekend about he's getting on his age, but like having a hard time understanding that like the files could be on his laptop, but also in iCloud at the same time. And it's like, how does that work, right? And like, okay, let's start with the simple basic things that you can do something like that versus explaining some intricate low-level detail that the guy's not going to get or doesn't care about. But anyways. I don't know. I'm a Krebs fan. I like his stuff. What sort of caught my attention here, and I don't know if this is AppSec or not, but I'll try it. Do you think we're ever going to get signed phone numbers or signed telephone calls? Right? Because right now they're improving the ability to stop people from spoofing numbers, but still, it's obviously nothing on the radar of what it could be. But like IPv6 or encrypted v4 or VPNs or all these different ways we have nowadays, TLS, to actually confirm that sender and receiver are who they should be. But then you go back to the pot still that telephone network, and it's this thing from how many decades ago? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen somebody. I got a good chuckle. Somebody was posting on their LinkedIn profile, like X.25 expert, which is like, wow, that is a deep cut for old POTS network for
That's
those in
good.
the know. But to your point, John, like Apple, speaking of which, they have what is it like? You can get a little silver tag, a label from a trusted support. Like if you're using Apple Card and you talk to Goldman Sachs, there's a little token. Speaking of vocabulary, I'm losing all mine right now. That basically says this is the equivalent of signed. You're talking to a verified identity rather than a spoof or a phisher. This is a small step. I think it relies more on the underlying RCS or iMessage capabilities, and you need that end-to-end encryption. So maybe I will throw this out is that with the telco compromises that was all being discussed at the end of 2024, even CISA was coming out and saying end-to-end encryption is probably a good thing. Maybe that's what's also going to get us into that that indicator of strong identity on phone numbers. That'll be. I'm going to throw that down on my own 6 months later checklist. We'll see at the end of 2025 what that looks like.
Probably take a little more than 6 months, but
Yeah,
I'm with you in spirit.
yeah, maybe 7. But speaking of scary QR codes, and if you can't click on a link, you definitely can't scan a QR code because it will empty your fridge, it will steal your cat, it will do terrible things to you. But what is it? FTC is putting those on IoT devices. So what do we? You've got you alluded to this, John, the cyber trust mark.
Yeah, I
from
was
the White
looking
House.
for. I haven't gone and tracked down the mark. I think I've seen it before. So this is one of those things which we talked about a few times in 24, if not 23. I've done a talk on this previous life for CNCF on nutrition labels in security. And it's whichever way you want. I mean, the nutrition labels was a little more aimed towards the engineers and the nerds, not the general public. So this is the dumbed down version of it. But we've got Europe has this now. I think probably California has it. This idea of like, hey, we want something on a product so that if someone is in a retail store and they're looking at A versus B and trying to figure out is either of these going to survive more than like 3 months without like someone hacking it. It allows them to now actually go and read up and understand a little more about that. I think what's interesting about us, not to put words in your mouth, but how many people will do that? But there's sort of it's almost like a public shaming type thing, right? And so I'm curious to see, will this actually improve the security of these products? If a product manager making a webcam somewhere in the world wants to sell in the US, and says, shoot, once I put this QR code on there, everyone's going to know how little effort we went to. That'll be the interesting part to see. Or like, okay, now you've got really, I guess at the end of the day, you've got this code on the product now, but who says that what's on that page that you're going to is even close or remotely accurate or honest or any of those things? So I don't want to be negative, but I'm sort of curious to see how it plays out.
Me too. And for part of me, one of my gut reactions to this is it does shift some of the burden onto the consumer to go make your decision whether you want to use this or not, and figuring out, well, how informed are they? Do they have to know the difference between phishing, smishing, quishing, blah, 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 the jargon, or do they just need to know this mark indicates that it uses end-to-end encryption? Or this mark indicates that it uses a hardened libc++ library, or it's using stack canaries. How detailed, how informative is this going to be versus...
I'm only buying webcams that use hardened libc++.
I hope so. Yeah, no stack canary, no webcam.
What I remember where my thought was before the show on this. And I guess the equivalence of what we got going on here is sort of the warnings you get on a pack of cigarettes. Where in the U.S. right now they're minimal, and now they're thinking about putting warning stickers on alcohol for potential carcinogenic reasons. But if you go to Europe or different parts around the world, that it's a fairly obvious, like, if you smoke this, you are killing yourself. And I believe there's studies which have shown that has cut down on consumption of cigarettes, or I should say nicotine, or tobacco. It'd be interesting to see is there a direct play here? I don't think so, because it's one thing to say if you smoke this, you're killing yourself. It's another thing to say, oh, this is not using hard libc++ or whatever they put on that web page, right? So maybe this is the first attempt, and they'll have to refine. Maybe not. We'll see.
We shall see. Yeah, well, it's that KSLR. Everyone's going to be an expert on kernel hacking now in Linux. But the other thing people are perhaps becoming an expert on, John, is Rust. So I pulled an article when we kicked off the show this year about libcurl actually removing the hyper library, not embracing Rust because they got 95% of the way there. And then the last 5% was kind of tough, but it turned out nobody really wanted it. So where was the value? You've got an article that's going in perhaps a different direction, also has a wonderful title. So let you reveal that.
The Fish of Thesis, which is referring to the ship of Thesis. I had to look it up myself. There's a link in the article. And the ship of Thesis is basically Thesis' paradox, the concept of if you slowly rebuild a ship over time, like replace all the boards or all the sails and things like that, is still the same ship. So with that out of the way, we mentioned Fish here. And yes, this is, we saw an article 2-3 weeks ago, Fish releasing 4.0, Fishshell releasing version 4.0. And I didn't want to cover that. I wanted to see, I was waiting for this sort of the media article to come out. This is the sort of the retro, so to speak, right? Of hey, what happened? How did we do it? What's going on? So that's what this is. It's actually really neat. So let's see, where can we start here? It's obviously Rust. I think one of the interesting things to me up front, that it was interesting that they mentioned it, is Rust isn't always the most friendly thing to use if you're doing cross-platform. And they mentioned they're not running, they don't believe anyone's trying to run Fishshell on nonstop, which, if I remember right, is HP's mainframe language, or excuse me, OS. Again, we're waiting for everyone to correct us on these things, but they do run on several different platforms, and if they don't always have the same version of libc or something else, maybe they're missing a function. So how they actually go about tracking that type of thing down was sort of troublesome to them. But they also talked through why they left C++, which I thought some of their reasonings were interesting. So they mention, they don't mention memory safety. They do mention they really want to do something multi-threaded. And that's been holding them back. And multi-threading in C++ compared to Rust. They claimed Rust's, I think it's send and receive functions, if I remember right, were some of their favorite things they liked. So, because that allows you to send objects back and forth relatively securely compared to the menagerie, which is C++. What else did they have in here? They didn't like the tooling in C++, which I thought was interesting. And as an example, there's nothing like Rust up in C++. This feels like a bit of a stretch for me. Okay, Rust up is great for doing what it does, but C++ has been around for quite a while, right? I would have said that the tooling is pretty decent for that. That's me. And then one of their other complaints is the ergonomics of C++. Again, from, Rust has a bit of a learning curve, just going what is that thing on the line? It's a little bit closer to Perl, I would say, actually, compared to some other languages with some of the ways you use some of these things. So I don't know. It's interesting. They've released the first version out. They're happy with it. The one last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up. Really interesting. This comes back to the Fish of Thesis thing. So they purposely, when I read this initially, I was sort of shocked they did this, but they purposely decided to swap out piece by piece, going from C++ to Rust. And they didn't want the package to be broken for 6 months, so they wanted to do it this way. They used I think it's AutoCX++ to get the AutoCX, actually, no, it wasn't plus, to get a lot of the bindings between the C and Rust libraries going, so they could use that stuff easier, but even that had some problems with it. But yeah, they sort of went along and picked a piece that they want to replace, they'd swap it out, and the result of this, they were able to still do their unit tests and test the thing and see what's working. So it's an interesting read. If you're thinking about going down that path, like I know, Mike, you're always looking for something to rewrite. So here's sort of the other people's experiences of what that was like.
Yeah, I'm going to definitely take that back into the C++, port it back from Rust. Because actually one of my immediate thoughts or reactions was, well, C++, Admittedly, it can have a learning curve to it, but perhaps so can Rust. But there is, C++11 introduced a thread into its STL. You've got smart pointers. So there are certain things you can do that, and atomics is the other one I wanted to throw in there, that can be concurrency friendly. But they even call out, in C++17, there's a string view that is a safer way to just read only access to a string, but they're still complaining about the developer ergonomics of it. And admittedly, just because C++11 and Thread and atomics exist doesn't necessarily mean they're safe to use, easy to use, etc. And I think that just speaks to the idea of some conversations we've had with guests in the past of choose a language that your developers know and that's going to help your developers. One of the other examples in this case study that I appreciated was they're calling out the curses C library. And they said even with that, they were running into just pointers. And here's some weird stuff. This pointer can be null, but we're using this library, but we don't expect any of our pointers to be null. So now we have to do a lot of wrangling just to accommodate that. So it is pointing out that it's just developer friction is perhaps not quantifiable, but is very valid. And to their point was going from C++ into Rust was the happy path. And I'll just use that happy path phrase because that's what phrase that came up when we were talking about his shell last segment as well.
And just to mention, give people a sense of the scale of this thing. 1,155 packages changed, 2,600 commits by 200 authors. Jesus, man. 2 years of work, 57,000 lines of C++ ported over to 75,000 lines of Rust. That's a huge amount of work for an open source project when you think about it. That's really insane. So kudos to them. Looking forward to giving it a try.
Looking forward to that. And I think one final thing that I would be really curious about this is in the port to Rust, and I don't think they call attention to this in their article, is how many of their existing test cases started failing, or how many memory safety bugs or concurrency bugs did they start to identify when they had more code correctness, I'll say, from implementing in Rust. Because that's always a really helpful type of feedback to point out, this refactoring highlighted that we had bad code that just thankfully hadn't been exploited, but there's a bug. There was a quality issue in there. So now, John, turning to, we've got a couple minutes left in the segment, and I am going to dip into a top 10 list. This just so happens to be the top 10 web hacking techniques of 2024. The Albino Wax, over at Portswigger, they every year since I think 2016, they or a group have been doing a top 10 list of web hacks for the year since, 2006, I believe. Here is one where the nominations are just ending tomorrow. So if you're listening to this, get in quick by January 14th, but you'll have then a week of community votes to nominate a short list into the top 15, after which the top 10 will be chosen. And this did make me think of looking back towards, we covered a few of the top 10 web hacking techniques of 2023, which of course were released in 2024 last year. There was one about CSRF and PHP. Basically, PHP has some foot guns, an HTTP desync, some electron hacking, request splitting. One of my favorites, which we did cover, were HTTP parsing inconsistencies and the security consequences thereof. But we could even just look back 10 years. And if you look at the list from 2015, there is an XXE, an SSRF, a web timing, and XSS bypasses for WAF. The only real nuance is just that a lot of those relied on using Flash as their source. So for those of you who remember Flash, that existed a decade ago. So if there's one thing that's good, it's that we no longer have Flash around to deal with. If there's one thing that's not good, is I think XXE, SSRF, web timing, and XSS are all things that could show up on a modern AppSec top 10 list. So I don't know.
When I was doing the container security thing, one of my pitch to people would be like, about how I built Layered Insight is like, okay, think about it. Like, when PCs came along, when tablets came along, when iPad's tablet, when laptops came along, when containers, VMs, all these different types of things, we would always, as a security industry, have to like create the same group of what I call band-aids. So like the antivirus, the firewall, your file system scanning. But it's and that's what I was trying to do, something different. But it's that same type of thing, right? It's the technology changes, but how we attack and break it, not so much. Folks have to go look at this page. The amount of it'd be interesting to see. I don't know if they listed at our game count. There has to be 100, 150 different articles in here that they've linked to that you get to pick from. So it's not like an easy choice to just go through and find some of them. We were talking about double click checking. Was that last week? That's in here. It's an impressive list, and you just realized that's just last year. So worth a browse.
Yeah. So even if you just want to improve your AppSec education, you've got one page here with a bunch of articles that you could go read through and learn. I'm pretty sure you can learn at least something from every single one.
Keep you very busy.
Keep you very busy. John, we've both been very busy this segment. I think it's time for us to wind down and let our listeners go and send those emails about listener feedback and maybe any of the mistakes we made here. Because as I mentioned, we're not cats, therefore we're not perfect beasts. But I do want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank you, John, for joining for the news. Thank Kalyani and Fishshell for our interview segment. Please do remember to subscribe, share on the socials. Do check out our show notes. And speaking of AppSec, check out The Forever War by Bunny X. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.